but at the same time, we've got some really exciting presentations this afternoon, and I do want to make sure you have time to enjoy them, that the speakers get their chance to share their subject as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome on stage our next guest speakers. Those of you in the UK will know very well, and I also know there are colleagues around Europe that have listened with great interest to hear a very welcome pledge that was delivered by the Premier League a month ago. They made a public statement to say that their clubs are going to deliver to the Access for All minimum standards by August 2017, using the UK equivalent, the Accessible Stadia, which has the same standards as you're familiar with in the Access for All. So I'm going to invite the speakers on stage, and then they're going to share the story with you, how they're going about it, and then we'll invite some questions from the floor. So if I may, first of all, bring onto stage Cathy Long, who's Head of Customer Services at the Premier League. Thank you very much, Cathy. Do come and join us.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thank you. And then we have two architects that I know well from London 2012 and other projects who have been working with the Premier League, looking at how they implement the pledge. So I'm very pleased to invite from, I'll get this the right way around, Wilson, Owen and Owen. If I can invite Kevin Owens and Derek Wilson onto the stage, please, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cathy, I think probably the very best thing is to let you do your presentation and tell us how you're going to go about it to start with. That would be wonderful.
Thanks, Joyce. I'm going to do sort of a brief introduction as to how we got where we are today. And then Kevin and Derek, I think, have the harder job, which is to tell you how we're going to get to where we want to be in August 2017. My background is that I worked with fan organisations before I worked for the Premier League. And I remember vividly the first few meetings I did with supporters who were disabled, talking about their experiences of football and both the challenges they had and what they really enjoyed about the match. And I was really glad I had that experience, because it really sort of really resonated with me when I then started working in football and understanding what needed to be done. When I first started working at the Premier League, which is nearly 15 years ago now, the only guides really available were this one you can see here, which is designing for spectators with disabilities, which was sort of as faded as it looks, I think, really, on the screen. The Guide to Safety at Sports Grounds, which was not so old, but I think I'd say not so detailed in terms of what was needed in terms of facilities for people who are disabled watching football. And one of the first projects I got involved in was working on the Accessible Stadia Guide, which was a broad group of people from around football, from the Football Association, led by what was then the Football Licensing Authority, now the SGSA in England. And the idea was to look at what had gone wrong, really, in the stadiums that we'd built in the past. You'll know that we had a lot of building in the 1990s. We had a big rebuilding programme after the Hillsborough disaster. A lot of stadiums were built quickly, and probably too quickly, and without the thought, perhaps, that was needed to go into them in making this big transformation happen. And then once you've done that, you can be a little bit stuck with it if you're not careful. We've decided that we don't want to be stuck with it. What we want to do is to make sure that this guide that is now some 12 years old, nearly 13 years old, it'll be 14 years old by the time we're aiming to meet it, that what's in there is translated into actual sort of real practice at grounds. It was really an aim that we had at the time, which was, if anybody's going to build a new stadium, please get it right this time. Please take these guidelines. Please make sure that this is how you build your stadium so that everybody can enjoy it. Just over a month ago now, our clubs unanimously agreed to commit to improving accessibility for disabled fans. I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that they agreed to, and I'm not going to talk about the other work that we do with disabled fans, but if anyone's got questions, I'd suggest if you can ask me later, because I'll be around today and I'm around tomorrow as well. There's a broad aim which is to achieve better disabled access in stadiums, and particularly to ensure that the appropriate number of wheelchair bays are located in away sections. But the key one that we're going to talk about today is all clubs to achieve compliance with this Accessible Stadia Guide by August 2017. Clubs will, of course, be appointing disability access officers in order to comply with UEFA licensing anyway, so that's another programme which I think will help to transform the development. And they agreed that some club stadium assessments would be discussed with clubs at a senior level, before we made this commitment, we'd already engaged Kevin and Derek from Wilson-Owens to look at the architecture and to look at what needed to be done to get us to that stage, to get us up to the accessible stadia guide level. Before we'd even let them finished, we said, actually, we've decided we're going to do this a bit more quickly than we planned. And there was a bit of a challenge on. We didn't wait for the end of the report, really, so that's what they're going to cover. And they form part of a team, really, of advisory consultants that we've got on hand that the clubs can draw on. Because I think the biggest question we've had now from clubs is how do we do this? They used to ask what they needed to do. The Accessible Stadia Guide made that clear. Then they used to ask, why do we need to do it? I'm glad to say that I don't think they still ask why. I think they understand why. But the biggest question tends to be how. And all of those stadiums are currently being assessed in order to determine where disabled access can be improved. I think we're actually more than over a third of the way through the assessment now, which is good. We also have an equality standard in the Premier League, and that's something that all of the clubs have to now adhere to as part of our rules. And they have to demonstrate a whole series of actions against an action plan that they put together. And part of that is against disabled supported access audits in order to comply. So we've got various tools that we can use and various mechanisms to make sure that the right progress is being made. Something we've done for a few years as well is we do sort of mystery assessments. We don't tell the clubs when these people are going to turn up, but they will get a professional assessment from a professional disabled fan who understands about these issues, who will go out and they will produce a very thorough report of their experience of everything from trying to buy a ticket, trying to find out about availability of tickets, how it all works, through to the actual process of the match and leaving the match afterwards. As a result of that, clubs have made some really significant changes. And I just wanted to mention as well this app that we're producing, which will be out next year. One of the things I think that we found from those mystery assessments is there's a real gap in the information provision and in really good stadium maps and really, really good knowledge of stadiums. And we realise that's something we really need to improve if we're going to give people the confidence to attend matches, that if you need to plan and you really want to understand what's going to be there, it's actually as important to tell people what isn't there as it is to tell them what facilities will be there, so they know what to expect on the day. And I wanted to just mention some of the minor changes as well that we've asked our clubs to make, because I think that's really, really key. We're going to have quite a major programme which is going to involve some major builds at clubs. But often it's the simple things that can make the difference, and the sort of things that we've been talking with our clubs about literally just, you know, making sure that you use people's names to reassure them and give a bit more confidence. Better access statements, updating their website information and reviewing their terminology. Often the websites haven't been updated. It's often the oldest part of a club website, we find. That's really not good enough. It's actually more important that you get that sort of information updated than it is for anybody else. I won't run through all of these, but little things like code hooks make such a difference. Our mystery assessors found quite often that emergency cords in toilets will be tied up by the cleaners and then not dropped to the floor afterwards. Really a major problem if you haven't gone round before match day to make sure that they're all okay. We had an incident at a match recently where somebody tried to use a grab rail that wasn't fastened enough to the wall. And that could have been quite a major incident for that person. So it's teaching clubs that they really need to check all of these things. And making sure that, you know, we have commentary now. But if the headsets aren't charged and checked before the match, again, that's not a lot used to people, and that's the sort of thing that we've been picking up on and just saying, as a whole programme of major improvement, that's what we need to work on. Digital inclusion, I think, is something that's partly going to be covered later, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I'm going to hand over to Derek to talk about how we're going to try to do this and the challenges that we have.
Thanks, Cathy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Derek Wilson. Thanks, Joyce. Thank you. Before I kind of dive into some of the examples of what we've been suggesting to the various football clubs, I just wanted to bring up one point that kind of, I think, makes a transition between what Cathy's just talked about and what Kevin and I are up to at the moment with the various football clubs in the Premier League. And that is that in the UK, we have the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and in the House of Lords there's been two readings of a potential change to the Safety at Sports Ground Act for 1975, where accessible regulation of accessible stadia and what comes from that document, the document that Cathy showed you earlier, could be regulated. That's not law yet, but it could be, and that's going to be an interesting one to watch over the next few months. So, what have we been up to? Well, I think as Joyce and maybe Cathy repeated, we are not access consultants, we're architects. And what we were asked to do by the Premier League was to primarily look at improving the number of wheelchair positions and the distribution and amenity seating, so enhanced amenity seating and easy access seating, and perhaps even bringing in definitions of those, because the accessible stadia document didn't include those. So we think that's very important. We started with numbers. So the image you can see on the screen is what I always, probably because I'm quite familiar with it, call Table 4. This was published back in 1998. It's been slightly upgraded in the sense that it's been made clear that it's not just the number of wheelchair positions in a stadium, it's the enhanced amenity seating as well. So that's become very clear. So we've been looking at, in existing stadia, where wheelchair positions could be put, and the possibility, and finding better locations sometimes for the amenity seating. The other thing, and this may well prove to be an interesting challenge for the clubs, is distribution. This is an extract from Accessible Stadia, from one of the worked examples. This kind of very nicely, if you can see the darker red lines, those are the suggestions of where wheelchair positions could go. There's the guidance, because Accessible Stadia is an advisory document, it's a guidance document at this time, it's not a you shall do this, is very neatly set out, and that works quite well in a new stadium, but in an existing stadium, it's quite a different matter. Now, I'm not going to name this ground, but I'll tell you it's real. And I hope you can see the colours on here. The blue are the existing wheelchair positions. So if you imagine the bottom is the south, so we'll call that alongside the south stand at the front. In blue are wheelchair positions there, and then in the northwest of that stand, going around the corner, the positions there, and then oddly a couple of positions at the back of that stand, and then you'll see if you could take the orange away, there would be no other wheelchair positions. So we've started by coming up with ideas of where wheelchair positions could go, which are the orange locations. So in all 4 stands, enhancing what's in the south stand, some in the north, some in the east, and some in the west. But what will be an interesting challenge for this club is that it might even result in them building a new grandstand altogether, which, given the 2017 timescale that we're talking about, which is less than 2 years away, will be an interesting challenge. So that will need to be dealt with. So I'm just bringing up, this is an existing stadium. So the image on the left as you look at it is, this stadium has pretty good distribution. It's quite good on numbers. The image on the left is the upper tier. Obviously you need stairs, obviously you need lifts, access to this top level. I think this is something like level 7. The design has to allow for able-bodied people to walk past the wheelchair bays, and also to be able to get into the toilet and to the concessions. So you could, it slipped slightly, but trust me, that area that's kind of in green is the area for wheelchair positions. And on the mid-level, we might have a slightly elevated position. This, in this case, runs along the end of a stand. And at pitch level, it gets quite interesting in the sense that this is the same side at pitch level, but at different ends of the pitch. So the image that is third from the left is at one end of the ground, so the wheelchair positions there are effectively at pitch level, but at the other, if you walk straight down, you are I don't know, perhaps half a metre below. This is because football pitches, particularly in the Premier League, are flat, they're horizontal, they don't slope anymore. And traditionally for years, lots of football pitches were very undulating, to say the least. So there are a few challenges, particularly where a stadium is built on a hill, such as Newcastle or West Brom or Aston Villa. They bring in the difference in levels, as you will appreciate, they're going to have to deal with. Other ideas that we're now looking at, not just in this case, you can see this is Manchester United, looking at double tiers. This might apply here, it might apply in other grounds, depending on the size of the tier and the grandstands we're dealing with. It could be that we put positions, highlighted, unfortunately in green here, at the back of a lower tier. We may have to encourage the club, well, we will encourage the club to raise the position of the wheelchair up by putting a new platform deck in, so that if somebody stands in front of that position, they can see over the top. But what you might see from the photograph is that's quite in shadow, and the higher you lift the person, the lower the high ball line. So if you're trying to look for a goal kick, because of the overhang of the tier above, that might become quite difficult. So, but that's kind of one of the prices of an existing stadium. Other ideas we've been looking at are, there we go, sometimes at the back of a lower tier, below an upper tier, there's quite a gap. In this case, there's an opportunity to perhaps open up the brickwork wall that separates the back of the lower tier and the underside of an upper tier, and put positions in that location. Not quite finally in terms of ideas, we've been looking at, can we put positions in new accommodation, new build at the back of an upper tier? The theory being that, and probably in most cases we've looked at, the view will be clear, it'll be very high up in some cases, not particularly in this one, but with clear views of the pitch. There may be issues of what we call the diagonal sight line. So if you can imagine looking towards the either corner flag across the heads of the people sat in the stand in front, that will need some detailed consideration. And perhaps the hardest of all is the image on the left. If you can imagine, if we can't build at the back, and we need to get the elevated positions, we might have to change some of the vomitories. Now, just in case, vomitories is, I won't go into the Latin definition of vomitory, but the vomitories are where the people enter the seating area of a grandstand. We may have to change these, which will inevitably mean changing steelwork and concrete and moving walls, putting in small lifts and extending what we call the vomitory landings to be able to get to those positions. So that will be quite a challenge. Our next steps. Well, I think when we started, we looked at five grounds to begin with, and we looked at a large stadium, a medium-sized stadium on a very compact site, looked at a brand new a stadium built wholly new in the 1990s, a stadium that has been rebuilt bit by bit, by stand, and another that's had enhancements as it's gone along. So we looked at those stadiums quite quickly, and we kind of had the hope that our knowledge from 2012 would be that we find kind of a temporary solution, if you like, a demountable solution which would become a one-size-fits-all. What we actually found, as Cathy and Kevin will tell you, is that every stadium has its own quirks, idiosyncrasies, that each one has to have its own bespoke solution. So whilst we put out some general ideas, as we've just shown you, they will need detailed solutions that they will work with their designers to resolve between now and August 2017. For us, over the next few weeks, we have accelerated our visits to each one of these stadiums. So I think we're up to 16 visits now. Some we've been to more than once. We have 2 more next week, and then 2 more the following week, and then we will present to Cathy and her team at the Premier League our findings on all this. And then I think there will be dialogue with a number of groups, I'm sure including level playing fields, over the weeks to follow. So quite a challenge ahead of us, but that's where we currently are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a big pledge. For those of you that don't know, I do wear another hat. I'm chair of Level Playing Field in the UK. So for us, it's a really important milestone, and we've all worked together for a lot of years, and I know there is a genuine recognition that this is long overdue, but extremely welcome. So before opening to the floor, because I would imagine there will be some questions, Cathy, just a question for you. We have other clubs from around Europe here. We have other football federations and associations. We have the European Club Association here and a number of leagues represented. What would your advice be in perhaps motivating them to think along similar lines, and I guess realistically knowing that the Premier League is, I think, probably the richest league in Europe?
I think I would say that you find that most things are possible in some way. I don't know if you guys would agree. There are things, there are challenges, and we have been to some stadiums, you have, I think, where we've thought, you know what, I'm really glad they're about to rebuild this place, because to do it without that would be an incredibly major challenge, and luckily some of our clubs are in that position financially where they can do that. Well, I have to say, for the most part for us, the barriers haven't been financial. It's been more about the scale of the work, about the impact at the time, you know, about how long it will take to do the work, about whether they'll get planning, all of those things. But it's surprising what happens when you get everybody to make that commitment, because a lot of the, whether they're reasons or excuses or difficulties or challenges, will fade away, and what you're left with is the reality, and there will still be some challenges, there will still be some things that can't be overcome. But I think we tend to say to the clubs, you know, there may be another way. It's why we engaged experts in the field in the first place, to say we want to know really what the picture is here. Come on, guys, tell us what the real issues are here. Are there excuses being made? You know, what's realistic and what isn't? And I always come back to those sort of, I call them often the marginal gains or the quick wins, you know, the little things that you can do that might seem small to you, but it's a major issue to somebody if something like a cord is tied up and you can't use it. There's absolutely no use having an emergency cord. There's no use in installing some great new system for your audio commentary if you don't keep the headsets charged up. So I think it's also helped us to get clubs to focus on those other issues. We had a recent meeting at Swansea with all of the clubs together to talk about this, and they grasped on a lot of these quick wins very quickly, partly because that is easier than the big challenge facing them. But I thought, you know, both of these things are going to happen, both the major works and the smaller stuff. So I think that's helped to stimulate people. There's always something that you can do to improve.
Yeah. And I guess another thing to think about is reputation. You know, at a time when football hasn't got the best reputation, this is an area where there is a win for everybody, for all of us that require access, but then for the leagues, the clubs, that everybody wins at this. So the investment is extremely worth it, both the time investment, the planning investment, and of course, where needed, the money investment.
I think our clubs understood that, and I think they recognised that, you know, they often get bad publicity, but I think when they were getting real bad publicity on this, it did wake some of them up.
Yeah.
It did make them think about things in a different way.
Brilliant.
There was nothing good about getting bad publicity on your access.
No, nobody wins then. Thank you. I wonder if we have some questions from the floor. If we can have David first.
Hi, Cathy.
Hi.
Hope you're okay. Well, first of all, can I say it will give me enormous pleasure if at our next conference in 2 or so years' time, we can announce that all Premier League clubs are compliant. That's something we look forward to. So it's been a long journey, as Joyce says. I've got two questions. One is, these things need teeth. And what will be the situation for clubs who are not compliant in 2017, which isn't very far away? And secondly, with clubs that have major stadium developments, I mean, we don't get into specifics, but we know Chelsea, for example, whose stadium could take 4 years or so, as I understand it. What's the position there? I mean, I presume common sense will probably have to prevail in a situation like that. But I'm more in a sense, the first question, the real one, is what happens where there is non-compliance for either even for good reason, but certainly for no good reason.
Well, when I've had these discussions with clubs, I've said, well, the compliance is with their own commitment, really. You know, they're the ones that have made this commitment, and they're the ones that need to stick to it. And I think there would be terrible publicity if clubs just said, yeah, we know we made that commitment, but we didn't really mean it, and we've forgotten about it, and look over there at our nice, new, shiny centre forward. You know, I don't think that would go down too well. I think we are aware, though, there are going to be some real challenges in terms of the timescale for if clubs just need to get planning. And the guys have said that. They've said, look, I think you've got some, I think it's going to be tricky. My view for clubs like Chelsea, Tottenham, for instance, that are also moving, they will be moving into a new stadium probably a year after, is it 2018 they're due to move into their new stadium? I wouldn't expect them to be therefore meeting this by 2017. Hopefully they'll be playing in an alternative stadium in 2017 that does meet the requirements. So that's what we'd also hope with Chelsea. I think with Chelsea, the tricky thing is if their plan doesn't go ahead. If for any reason they don't get permission to do the build, I think from what you guys have said, there's a real challenge with the stadium. It's not going to. There aren't easy answers to some of this.
No, but I can understand your answer for the second question. The second part. I mean, if Chelsea are doing a development, clearly you expect this to be part of that development. But you could find that out of the 20 Premier League clubs, there could be half of them who, for various apparently good reasons, you know, planning this or something here or something there, or maybe even they're not too keen on it, and you can shelter behind all sorts of things. And that sounds, with respect, that sounds a bit of a soft answer in a way. Because what so what does this commitment mean? What 2017 means it's a sign of good intent, possibly, but is it in fact no more than that?
Well, you'll know from our rule book the way that it works is that if there's a breach of the rules, there's either a board decision, usually if it's something quite minor and straightforward, you know, something like they didn't submit their team sheets in time or something, you know, there's sort of set fines for those things. Something bigger, so if they didn't meet the equality standard, and I think if they weren't doing this, then they would fail to meet the equality standard because they would have put together an action plan, they would have said we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they wouldn't meet it, then it would go to an independent commission to decide what the penalty would be. And I'll have to say I wouldn't want to be a club in that position with an independent commission looking at it and saying, well, you said you'd do these things. They would obviously have to look at the reasons why and be reasonable about it. But I think whenever clubs tend to ask those questions, I tend to tell them that I don't really want to have to find out the answer because I'd rather they complied, because you don't know what a commission will do. You don't know what the size of the fine may be or what the penalty might be. We don't set those. So. I hope they don't find out, but it'll be interesting if we do.
Thank you.
I think just to add to that, the point, David, about the bill, if that goes through, kind of gives accessible stadia teeth. Whether the Sports Ground Safety Authority, and I kind of sit here as a board member there, have the ability to do that is a challenge for them as well. So there are a number of challenges that go out from this. And September the 10th is a month ago. It's early days on a very, very rapid programme. So I think the next month will reveal a lot in what we find and pass over to Cathy's team.
I mean, the ultimate test would be in the courts. And I've said to all of our clubs, I wouldn't want to be in that position of you know, let's just make this agreement and say that we're going to do this stuff. Do you really want to find out in court, or do you just want to get on with it?
The one thing I'd also add is what we're enabling through the Premier League is at the moment is, rather than asking the clubs almost the open-ended question, we are attempting to give some clear answers. So the interpretation through that is at least taken down a notch, so that at least we can look at reality rather than in a bit of smoke and mirrors. So we've tried to take that out of it by assisting with this process.
Yeah. we're not really getting into that discussion with clubs about what if we don't do it. We're just saying you're going to do it, and let's look at how we get there.
I can see lots of hands going up around the room. I'm not surprised. If we could start at the back, Chris, there's a hand up at the back. That would be lovely. Thank you. I think there's a lot of interest.
My name's Wendy Morell and I'm from England. Forgive me, my impression is mostly this is around hard landscaping and structure. Maybe I nodded off or something, but I didn't hear anything about changing places toilets.
Is that in accessible stadia? I can't remember. Some of our clubs have got them and some haven't. I think it tends to be something they do as part of a rebuild anyway.
Yeah, it tends to include at least one, or that's the intention and the encouragement. And I think the supplementary guidance from the Sports Ground Safety Authority asks for that to happen. So I think the answer will be yes. I think probably you didn't fall asleep. I think our role has been very much as architects to look at the hard landscaping, I think, as you said. So the kind of bricks, mortar, concrete and steel, and how we deal with that, partly because we're architects rather than access consultants.
And in addition to that, just to state as well, although today we've shown primarily about what takes place within the seating bowls and the stands, of course, everything that supports that, hence the diagram that you saw of the existing ground with the rather random positions, that's of course driven by the facilities that sit behind those positions rather than just an arbitrary view of distribution.
We talk with the club about sizes of concourses, lifts, all those things go into those discussions. But we do get asked more than any question is about where can we put a wheelchair platform? How do we do this?
Okay, I know we've got some, there's another hand at the back. Just here, Chris, someone's got their hand very high up. If I may.
Hi, I'm Martin from United Discriminates. We've been campaigning for 15 months for better accessibility for disabled people, in particular families. You mentioned that the accessible stadia is an advisory, not a you shall do. It's been in place for 13 years, and it very much sounds like this is a advisory, you should really do this. The Premier League clubs haven't taken any notice of the accessible stadia for 13 years because it was a you shall do. It wasn't a you shall do. The Premier League need to make sure it is a you shall do to force them to make changes. And by saying it's a compliance with your own morals, clubs haven't got them. They're not bothered about the fans. Manchester United are saying that they'll double wheelchair places. That's still not enough. It doesn't make it compliant with the accessible stadia guidelines of level playing field, which is lower than the amount Cathy. So it's a bit woolly.
Man United have signed up to this agreement, as they all have.
Yeah, they have. So. But what happens if they don't honour it? Because they're not honouring the accessibility stadia guidelines now, and they haven't done for 13 years. So why do you think they're going to change in the next 2? What are you going to do to ensure that this happens? Well, the only thing is to stop them from playing and opening the grounds and taking money if they're not compliant.
I don't think we have the power to do that, and we don't have the power to change the language in the accessible stadia guide, for instance. No. We have to go with what they've agreed to do is what's in the guide and the supplementary guidance that's there. That may well change. You know, that could be adapted, but I think that's for the SGSA, who sort of own it, and the government, anyone else, to be looking at what should be in that.
You have the power. It's your competition. It's your name. It's your brand. You have the power to say, sorry, you don't meet the criteria. You've broken the rules, you don't play.
Well, we do. Then an independent commission has that power. Under our constitution, it's an independent commission that would make that decision as to what the penalty would be. So you'll have seen incidents in the past that have been in the news where a club has broken the rules and an independent commission has decided to fine them or decided to dock points or not dock points, or whether it's often quite controversial.
But a fine...
That's the way it works.
The Premier League's getting £5.16 billion next year from sports revenue on television. The club that finishes last get £90 million for finishing last. The fine isn't going to bother them. It needs to be clear now that this will happen come August 2017 if you're not compliant. And the only way to make clubs stand up and listen is by the accessibility stadia guidelines. If you don't comply, you don't open your ground.
There are many times when I wish I could change our constitution, but sadly I don't have that power. I'd love to.
Thank you. I saw some other hands just here. Joe, Keith here. Thank you.
Hi, Keith from Scotland again. Two questions, and we could answer them separately. The bill, Lord Faulkner's bill in the House of Lords, we were actually trying to find out through Lord Fulks if this was a UK bill or an England and Wales bill, because we weren't sure if that particular issue was devolved. Can you offer any clarification on that? That was my first question.
I can probably say a little bit about this because obviously we've done a lot of campaigning and lobbying and working with, and Lord Faulkner is actually also a Vice President of Level Playing Field, as you're probably aware, and he's actually a Director of Cathy as well. So he's steeped in this topic, he cares deeply about it. So the bill is in a transition period at the moment. Of course it has to fit with existing legislation, or it has to become a brand new Act of Parliament, which takes a long time to happen. But it's a work in progress, and certainly from our side, we feel that somebody has to, regulate is probably too strong a word, but we all recognise this is a long overdue, significant pledge. It's going to take good planning to make sure it happens. What we can't get to in August 2017 is some very sophisticated excuses. I won't let you do that. That would be unforgivable. So we've done this. It's exciting. We're really pleased. We're really positive. But guys, we've got to make this happen now. We can't have any more excuses, and I think we all recognise that. So in that process, I genuinely believe the bill will help.
And the bill will be in UK.
But whether it sees its way through the progress, we're not sure yet. Right. In its current format, for Sports Ground Safety Authority, their remit, and we actually have the Chief Executive here, is safety for, is it England and Wales or England? England and Wales. They do have a wider remit for all sports now, and to extend their best practice and knowledge share elsewhere, but it's in England and Wales that they have that capacity around safety. So there are a number of issues that need to be resolved. They are excellent custodians of this topic because they're impartial, independent, they're in the grounds looking at infrastructure from a safety perspective, but they would need additional resource to be able to support this. So all of these are discussions being had at the moment, and I'm really hopeful that the Premier League want this to happen. Perhaps we can get the Premier League and Sports Ground Safety Authority together, and we've got the architects involved, and together we get a real proper planning process to make it happen.
Well, the England and Wales, getting that answer has clarified a lot for us. The second thing is, am I correct in saying this pledge by the Premier League had involvement from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission?
No. I think I don't think it's any secret there was a lot of media attention around this topic.
Right. No, it's just because they've actually contacted me.
Right.
And they've asked to discuss us to try and do exactly the same thing in Scotland.
Okay.
So
what I can tell you about that is the Equality and Human Rights Commission government. It's being discussed in Parliament on a regular basis.
Right.
Those of you that follow will have known there was an extremely robust debate around the bill. And the Minister for Sport and the Minister for Disabled People have both pledged their support for fixing this situation, not just in football but in other sports. So in with all of that, the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the UK, of course, is the enforcing body of the Equality Act for government.
Right, so they've been
On
involved,
that
but not
basis,
driving
they've been
it.
involved, but
Right.
they're involved more generally in all sports, and Level Playing Field has been commissioned to do access audits of a number of different sports.
Right. Well, as I said, they've contacted and we're trying to do exactly the same thing.
I'm
in
aware
Scotland,
they've
which is good.
contacted you. Yeah,
Right.
that's good. So please do
Thanks.
work with them. It'll be worthwhile. Have we got a question here? Joe, would you be able to just sort of translate it for us, because we haven't got headsets? Thank you.
Simplement, il existe en France, depuis maintenant février 2005, une loi qui a déjà clarifié l'accès des handicapés dans tous les lieux publics et tous les lieux qui récupèrent de l'assistance.
Okay.
Et
thank
on
you.
voit...
Since 2005 in France, there's been a law on public places and those who receive the public.
Et malheureusement, on voit aujourd'hui que certains bâtiments publics, on a repoussé les sanctions jusqu'en de 10 ans. Donc, vous avez une loi, nous l'avons depuis maintenant 2005, et aujourd'hui, il ne se passe rien.
Okay, Joe, could you just, because we need to move on, so if you could just translate that bit. And I'll try and
So
answer.
they then delayed the law by 10
Yes,
years,
very
the
well.
sanctions on that law.
Yeah,
And so he's saying you have a law in England or Wales
Yeah.
and they have one
Yeah.
in France.
I can answer, if I may. Thank you very much. You raise a very important point. I think in the European context, and we remember here we're looking at 54 different countries, legislation in many of those countries around disability and access and equality doesn't even exist. In other countries, we have legislation. We have legislation in the UK which requires the individual to take an action. So I could sue a football club. That's quite scary for one fan to sue a big football club. And additionally, the relationship that a fan has with their football club, it goes against everything that would feel natural and normal. I think we're at a tipping point, particularly in the UK. Disabled people are fed up. Disabled fans are fed up. And I think if something didn't give soon, we would have certainly ended up in courtrooms. I have no doubt about that. I'm very aware that in France, because the work we're doing for Euro 16, that the legislation you have also perhaps isn't as helpful as it could be. And that's come up very much during the process of working with the venues, whereby the definition of the number of places in terms of wheelchair users, easy access and other aspects are decreed down to the local mayor's office once you get above, I think, a 10,000-seater stadium. And we went to the local mayor's office in every host city for Euro 16, and we were told at every single host city, we're not going to make that decree until they build the stadium and it's finished. So you see the chicken and the egg. So how can that be an effective law? We also know that because none of your public buildings met the French decree by January 2015, government has given them a reprieve and an extension. My advice to you, you're going to have to campaign and lobby. You need your national disabled supporters group to be up and running soon, and then you need to be speaking with the football authorities, you need to be speaking with your government, you need to be speaking with Emmanuel because she's a real champion for this cause, and you need to be pushing the change. We've been on a long journey in the UK, but the result is evident. You know, sometimes people working within football authorities may be more constrained than we realise. They can only fit within the rules. And you know, the Premier League is a collective of its clubs, so they have a vested interest. We know a lot of clubs don't want to go near this topic because they think it's going to cost them money. So you're going to have to put pressure on them to change, I'm afraid. I wish I could say it would be different. And maybe if they start to see the positive elsewhere, it will. But form your national group and start speaking and getting everybody, at least everybody speaks about the topic and understands the importance of it, it might change. I hope that helps. So, but it's a similar story in so many parts of Europe, and believe you me if I tell you, we're a lot further on than some countries where there's no legislation at all. There were a couple of other hands here, and I'm then mindful really we need to move on because we're running quite late. So 2 more questions. There's one here and then one here and then.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie from the Scottish FA. Cathy, just a quick question for you in terms of the supporters themselves. Were they engaged and consulted around this whole project?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that Joyce and Level Playing Field have been raising for as long as we've known each other, I think, for many years. They were involved in Accessible Stadia as well, when it was the National Association for Disabled Supporters, very much in the beginning. It was really between NADS and an architect who was working with the FLA at the time, Jim Froggatt, who said, you know, we have to put these mistakes right. We have to make sure that we don't build stadia like this in the future, that it all came from, really. I think the next stage when we're looking at what can be done with the stadiums is that consultation with fans. But we've set such a tight timeline that in some cases we would have to start building tomorrow. We would have to forget planning permission. You know, we would just have to go and build. And obviously there are processes, and that's one thing we've got to work around, is how we can make sure that the legislative processes that we have to go through with the government happen as absolutely as quickly as they can. Because if we get any delays on that, it's going to make life difficult. But we don't want to appear as though we're trying to force them into something that is.
And do you intend to continue to consult and engage then throughout the whole process with, you know, supporters, clubs at each of the different grounds?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's for the clubs to do directly with the fans of those clubs rather than for us to go. You know, I think that has to be a conversation with the supporters of those clubs. But also what we always try and say is, you know, you need to talk to the away fans as well, because it's not just the home fans that are using your ground, which I think is often where Level Playing Field in the UK have a really important role. Because there's always a little bit of a danger, I think, with the consultation that if you just talk to your existing disabled supporters who are already getting tickets and are already quite okay with things, you might not get the answer that is actually the best answer. You need to talk to the people who are actually excluded from your ground as well.
Thank you very much. Just one last question and then we really must move to the next session, if I may.
Hi. The Premier League have made a big pledge to deliver the minimum requirements within such a short space of time. My main concern is that I think a lot of clubs will take quick fixes to meet this target. What can be done to ensure that this doesn't happen? Because I think the quick fixes will only result in poorer facilities and poorer access.
Do you know, one of the things that Derek and Kevin said to me the other day was, they said, look, the reason this guide was written in the first place was because you did quick fixes in the 90s. And you didn't get it right. And so you had poor sight lines for people in wheelchair bays. Local authorities agreed to planners that they shouldn't. And they said to me, let's not do that again. So I think it's a really important point. And we're going to have to look at that. Because on the one hand, we've made a public commitment. We don't want to be here in 2 years' time saying we haven't done it. On the other hand, we mustn't make quick fixes that aren't right. They've raised exactly that point with us and said, just hold on with some of this and let's make sure it's right.
Well, we've got the A-team on the job.
Yeah.
We've got the other A-team questioning and watching between us. We will get there. And as you say, we don't want to be back here in 2 years' time with a list of excuses. We want to be back here celebrating the successes. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a really interesting session. Thank you very much. Thank you.